I'm happy to introduce our panelists to share in their expertise. First, I have Marlo Germanis, lead solution consultant with Braze. Welcome. Stephen Aldrich, co-CEO and founder of Ragnarok. And our very own Josh Wolf, Senior Director of Solution Consulting, Channel Partnerships at Tealium.
Woo! Thank you. Well, thanks for coming, everybody. It's great to see you all, and we're going to start off with a little icebreaker question. I guess if you, first I'll ask Marlo, then I'll ask Stephen. If you had your own personal Mount Rushmore, who would you place up on there? Just one, because we're kind of, you know.
That's easy for me. David Bowie. Always David Bowie.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome.
Michelle Obama, 100%.
Total win.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. I like to consider myself a little bit of a scientist. I'll put Charles Darwin up there. How about that? Awesome. So we're going to hop into it. And I think first question for the group, and I could have put him up on Mount Rushmore instead, but has everyone seen our blue beast walking around? And question for the group is raise your hand if you know why, like sort of what he's the beast of. Have you heard that little bit of old school Tealium lore? All right, we got some hand raisers, but not many. So when he first came out, he had an angry version and a happy version. And you can even find some of these dolls that sort of flip back and forth. And he's the digital marketing beast, and Tealium helps you tame the digital marketing beast, right? So that's sort of like the theme of what we're talking about today. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit there. And the next thing I just wanted to ask real quick is as far as the audience here, raise your hand if you know what Braze is. Right? Because it's, awesome, good. So a lot more people raising their hand here. But since it's Tealium conference, just wanted to make sure that we knew. Marlo, if you could just for the audience, just a couple sentences on what Braze is for those that don't know.
Of course, I'll try to use as little buzzwords as possible, but that's kind of hard in marketing. So we are a real-time cross-channel customer engagement platform. So we really help customers all the way from small size businesses all the way up to enterprise global businesses create really meaningful moments with their customers.
I work on the partnerships team here at Tealium, and I work with our strategy and service providers like Stephen and Ragnarok, and our technology partners like Braze and Marlo. And we're just going to do some questions and answers, and if there's a little bit of time at the end, we'll leave some opportunity for you all to ask a question or two. So think about it. If we have a little bit of time at the end, we'll give you that chance. First question is, so Tealium and Braze are both independent solutions, and we're both leaders in our categories, and businesses can integrate Tealium and Braze together to get even more value out of the combination. And I'm going to ask each of you, and again, this question will go first with Marlo. What does that mean to you? What's the additional value that our customers see out of the combination, out of the partnership, and maybe if you have an example of that.
Yeah, I think the most primary thing is that we really do have complementary architectures. I think you hear a lot in digital marketing about real time and this idea of real time, but being able to have a CDP and an engagement platform that are both actually and inherently real time allows you to really realize the full potential of your data in both. And so I do find when we see clients having best in breed and having platforms like Braze and Tealium working together, you really do realize more out of both.
I'll have to say from my side, so I think there's, I always think of like Tealium is this kind of amazing, data platform, place that you actually, quote unquote, orchestrate the data, so to speak. But Braze is also a place where you orchestrate the action, the activation, so to speak. So if you're a marketer, right, your goal in life is to log into one tool and never have to think about it anymore. But of course, you would be giving up so much competency and capability if you were to be in those types of providers, they who shall not be named because of how bad they are. But I think that you mentioned best in breed, and I think as a marketer, being able to have a way to kind of have both the systems be aligned in terms of their philosophy is very important. Also to have the UIs be sort of very aligned as well. So when we think about, I'm going to go in and I'm going to do a real-time use case, and my use case is primarily in retention. I'm going to do email. I'm going to do SMS. Braze is my target platform for that. But maybe I also want to pair that with a retargeting campaign through paid social, or I want to do some direct mail, or I want to do other channels that maybe Braze doesn't necessarily support intuitively in their platform. It might make more sense for me to use Tealium for that. So I kind of move the orchestration and sort of that capability of the tool in both places, where I'm doing maybe a very sophisticated digital retargeting, but my paid social is kind of at the mercy of whatever I'm doing in Meta or in LinkedIn. But in for anything that's direct mail, it's more or less, it's, again, you're kind of leaving it to the hands of their system. There's less that you're doing hands-on. I feel like you have that nice complement in Braze where you're so much more hands-on on that platform, and you're getting a lot more kind of value out of it. That's feeding data back into Tealium. You're then taking that data, you're then using it to create more segments. You're doing a lot more kind of rich, we'll say, orchestrations, activations off the back of that. And I think that's like that kind of perfect feedback loop as you go through it. So yeah, being in that best in breed stack and having them being so complementary to one another, it's just a really great kind of thing that works together.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Awesome, thank you. And if you didn't catch it, right, I think that the bi-directional connectivity between Tealium and Braze is really, it's powerful, and allows Tealium to give Braze better information to trigger and personalize, but then it also allows Braze to give that information back to Tealium. We can see the customer journey that they're going through on Braze's side. We can extend that out into other channels. The other part that I heard was real time, and real time is important. It's one of the core values here at Tealium. And before I ask the next question, which does relate to real time, I did want to share a quote that one of my colleagues had given me, because I was sort of hunting for some statistics around what real-time means to our customers. And this is a testimonial that we're still working on with them, so I'm not allowed to say their name yet, but I was told that it's gonna come out pretty soon. But campaigns that use real-time event data perform significantly better than those on a determined send schedule, and that they said that they saw 23 times the click-through rate and 10 times the conversion rate when they compared those, sort of the static campaigns versus the real-time triggered campaigns. And I think that's really impressive, and that's something that we could do sort of out of the box. It's just basic functionality of both of those tools. A lot of the times when I talk to customers, they don't sort of know what that improvement is because they didn't run the test. So for all of you, I'd encourage you to do that test, pull out a control group and see what the difference is when you start using a new tool like that, because it's really great to then go back to your boss or whoever and show them the improvement that you're able to make there. So on to real time. It's a term that means a lot of different things to different people. And from my point of view, what it really means is just being able to reach each customer at the exact moment that they will respond to the message best. And as they're interacting with your brand, you want to be able to adapt and change and reach them at the right time. So I'll start with Steven this time, and I will say, what does real-time mean to your customers, and sort of what do you see the value of real-time being?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think first off, from a customer perspective, when you think of real-time, right, I want to just be very clear here on definition. Like, we're talking like sub 5 minutes, right? Sub 1 second. Like, we're in that like real time. We're not like real time and it's like 15 minutes later, right?
As far as Tealium and Braze are concerned, we're talking milliseconds.
Yeah, there we go. All right, we're real time. We're like talking real time. Yeah. So here's a great example of, I work with a lot of clients that do real-time use cases, and here's a good example of one that's, we'll call it an e-commerce example, but it can apply to anything, right? Like, don't take the exact of what I'm saying here, but we had a client who they would be sending out essentially an abandoned cart concept, right? And abandoned cart's a great concept, right? But they are a brand who also likes to be really edgy on their inventory stock levels. And so things sell out really fast. Like, I'm talking like something could be posted and be sold out 10 minutes later. And when you think about that from a concept perspective, right, it's like, okay, well, my typical abandoned cart email, I'm gonna send 30 minutes later, an hour later. It's very kind of standard practice that they would have in place. But they would be sending out, I don't know, I'd say about 30% of their emails or SMS that they would send out, they would be sending out of stock items, which is a pretty terrible experience, right? And so we had to build this concept of, all right, well, if something's out of stock, we still want to message them, but maybe we message them a little bit differently. We say, this item's now out of stock, here's a good replacement. There's sort of one strategy for it. A second one is we just don't send them anything, right? I mean, we don't really have anything to talk about, and they're probably not going to buy anything anyway. And then the third is, let's just send them the normal email to see what's in, something that's out of stock. And we'll just not say anything and see what happens, right? Really kind of interesting concept, right? The sort of first example that we had where we did a recommendation, as you can imagine, that's going to be the best one because there's somewhere else to land them on, right? Like they're still a very engaged customer. But what we found over a long period of time is that those people don't have a higher LTV because the nature of the business was limited time inventory. If you actually own more of that, customer experience of like, we actually limited time, you're changing behavior over a longer period of time on these users. This was over like 9, 12 months we measured this. We would see that they would actually, if we didn't message them at all, they would actually have a higher LTV because they'd be more receptive to buying right then and there in the product experience and be a little bit less lazy about it, so to speak, or let less distractions. They would carve out time. And the third, obviously, you can expect that was kind of the lowest performer. We need something that would be like a control experiment. So you think about that concept, right, of like real time is now both the behavior that the customer is doing, it's also the inventory level of what's on the site. And I think when you combine those two concepts together, those are not like natively like things that work together, right? They don't normally collaborate. One's object data, one's user data, right? And I think having a platform like Tealium that can actually, and Braze, which can combine both these things together, that's super powerful. And I love that concept of like, I can do this, and it's not just behaviors. It's like stuff in a warehouse. And that's the real cool real time stuff. So sorry, Marla.
Oh, don't apologize. That was great. No, absolutely. Whenever I'm speaking to a customer, a prospective customer, and they bring up real time, I always ask them to define it. I think that is absolutely crucial because there are many customers who are used to dealing with vendors who define real time and use real time and say that in the course of minutes or even seconds, which is, pretty good. But like we said, sub-second latency, right? And so even for Braze, when we think about our average API response time, 40 milliseconds. When we think about the top to bottom stack, like the moment that we get a data point into our system to then segmenting it, orchestrating it, using it to personalize a message, creating that message, deploying that message, and then getting that feedback loop, that's still 1.1 seconds. So what we can really do with that, what that allows is for things like, a low bank account balance alert is only helpful if you get it before the fee kicks in, right? Like if you are getting an abandoned cart notification, that's only helpful if you haven't already purchased the product, right? And so creating these moments with your customer that aren't only, driving revenue and conversions, but are also really creating that real conversation. It's not just real time, but it's about how conversations are in real time. And if you are waiting on stale data, life just doesn't stop just because your data is in between batches, right? And so I think losing out on that real time really puts the robot back in the machine and takes the humanity out of the communication for sure.
Thank you. Couple other good examples that I've seen over the years, and one, Marla, that you mentioned while we were sort of chatting before. One is turning off the marketing as well, right? The second that people disqualify themselves or make that purchase, or you realize they're actually an employee and not a customer, or whatever the case may be, let's shut that all off because it could be annoying, or it certainly could cost money. You can save that money and spend it on an actual customer instead. So that's one that's really interesting. And then I know there are a bunch of healthcare customers here, and in the past we've had some of our customers do like click to call off their website, and we can sort of track that behavior of that prospective patient or that patient and pass that over to the call center. I know Braze and Tealium, we both have sort of HIPAA compliant versions of our software, so there's all sorts of other real-time healthcare use cases that we'd be happy to talk to you about in the future. But just some really good examples that our customers saw a lot of value out of over the years. And just remember, it doesn't all have to be in real time. You could always put in delays if you feel like you need to, but you never can reach them at that exact moment unless you have that capability in the first place.
you can always slow it down. You can't always speed it up.
Exactly.
That's true.
And the paid note that you made is, and that I really love, and this is something that I think is super valuable, is when we think of the cost of each channel, right? Like when we think of what it costs to send an email or a push versus a paid ad, we're talking about fractions of a cent versus potentially $1. And so being able to suppress that ad in real time and being able to, like to your point, suppress any communication in a more expensive channel, it saves a lot of money.
Oh, and on the compliance side as well, right?
Absolutely.
Like the second you get, some sort of GDPR request or an unsubscribe or anything like that, and to be able to filter that across all your different channels, I mean, you're saving yourself from a future lawsuit for sure.
Absolutely.
Especially if you're in some of these other more aggressive countries.
Yeah, that's true. If someone unsubscribes or says, don't follow me, at this point, everyone's expecting that to all happen immediately. And if it's sort of making these hops through all these different systems and then they get that email tomorrow, they might be a little upset about that. So yeah, other ways that we're not necessarily reaching out to market to them, but you still want to be able to react to that in real time.
Oh, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you so much. The next question is one that I've gotten a lot over the years, sometimes, sort of talking through solutions with Braze. But so I've been at Tealium for a while and, worked here when Audience Stream was brand new, right? People didn't even know what to call it. And we would go in and talk to the media team and they'd say, oh, well, we don't need that. We have a DMP, right? We do all our segmentation there. Or then we would talk to the loyalty team and they'd say, well, we don't need that. We have a CRM system and so on, right? But as you all know, or as I hope you all know, each of those tools is going to have a different set of data and it's going to lead to sort of an inconsistent customer experience because they have different views of their customers, different segments that they're building out. And that's the purpose of the CDP in the first place, right? So my question to Marlo and to Stephen is really, what's the best practice on segmentation? Because, we can segment in Braze and we can segment in Tealium and the partnership is strong, but sometimes there's a little bit of confusion there, especially on the customer side. So, Marlo, you first, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. It's one that we get a lot, and I think it really varies based on the customer, right? There are some, especially large enterprises, where the team that is handling segmentation and audience building is an entirely different team altogether, right? And so being able to have that tool and being able to handle those really, really complex audience builds, and then to be able to pass that to the marketer in Braze, who can then very easily layer on light filters that match their language, the UI that matches their language. It makes it really easy to activate on that Tealium power. I do think as well, when we think about integrating Braze with Tealium, there are a lot of massive strong suits Tealium has that massively help Braze when we think about identity resolution, propensity models. I always say we're not a CDP. I think a lot of people get really confused about who is a CDP, where's the line, where does it stop? We're not a CDP. I think we have, there is the case where we have a really small, tiny little business that's a startup and they forego the CDP and they use Braze to try to replace that. But when we talk about medium and large size businesses, enterprises, that's no longer an option for most of you. And the sophisticated requirements of creating and managing this data, Braze is always going to be much more powerful if you're really intentional about the data that you send it. We don't want it all. We want the good data. And so Tealium really helps us filter that so that we can be more powerful.
Well, you heard it from Marlo. Braze is not a CDP. So I think there's a couple interesting things, right? I think on the enterprise side, some clients we work with in Braze, they have literally 1 billion emails, right? Most people in this room probably don't even have 10 billion, 1 billion is so many. And there's just no real system in place that is set up to actually handle 1 billion users and to query 1 billion users, right? You just got to think how many rows of data that is. And there comes a point where you have to decide what is the best technology to filter when I'm going to send downstream, right? Meta can't handle 1 billion users in their audience things, right? There's so many upper limits. And Braze is hugely scalable, but do you really want to manage 1 billion users, of only which probably 300 million you can actually email, or 50 million you actually have phone numbers for and have opt-in SMS permissions? And so there's this nice almost staging environment that I think that the CDP really brings to the table, especially when we want to kind of manage the consumption costs that we're going to have in other platforms. There's something that Mike Anderson said yesterday in a meeting I was in with him, where you mentioned almost creating these like sort of like micro, I'll call them like micro instances of Snowflake or micro instances of AWS, right? Where you're kind of taking a portion of your total database and using that as what you want to do for querying and what you want to sort of look at as your universe. So you're not spending all of the compute costs and everything trying to run the entire database every single time. I think the CDP plays very well in that space of being able to say, you know, if I have so many users and I need to filter this down to just the audience that I really want for Braze to send, I would want to do that in the CDP because I don't need to send Braze everything and then filter down to Braze exactly who I want to message, nor do I want to manage the delete cycle of those people who I'm not going to message anymore, right? And so instead of creating this sort of cycle of, you know, let me, you know, put everything in there and then manage out, I could just manage in from the get-go. And I think that staging environment that CDP offers is great. On top of that, I know we didn't really touch into this as well, is, you know, both tools offer a way to pull directly from the data warehouse. And there are, you know, great use cases where that might make sense. Actually, Josh, let me bring this over to you because I think you've got the slide here to talk through.
Yeah, I just pulled it up. So just to add a little bit more complexity to the conversation, right? Braze can hook into Snowflake, Tealium can hook into Snowflake. We can both segment. So, you know, really, you need to talk about this and figure out everyone's swim lanes. From my point of view, right, we were talking before about inventory and trying to, you know what product to serve up based on whether it's even available or not. And that's one thing that I heard that Braze is using their Snowflake integration for, right, to hit a product database and to make sure that the stuff that's in that SMS or the stuff that's in that email is actually still there. So I think that makes a lot of sense as you're sending out those messages, pulling in that data and making sure that you're giving them the right message at the right time. At the same time, we have our outbound real-time integration into Snowflake that's just been pushed out to general access this week. Our inbound from Snowflake we're going to be testing really soon. And again, to quote Mike, we like to think of that as sort of like the RAM and the hard drive, where Tealium's the RAM and Snowflake is the hard drive. And I might not know in Tealium that this customer has called the call center 25 times, but in Tealium we know that they are an unhappy customer. Right? So we know that snapshot of what they look like right now, but in the data warehouse, we have all that other historical data. And if you ever did need to know what they did on the 7th call that they made, 6 months ago, we could always go back in there and take a look. So there's a lot of this sort of complementary nature between these three different tools. You just have to understand which place it's right to sort of take each action. And a lot of forethought, a lot of strategy needs to go into figuring all that out. But once it is, it's a very effective system.
So I want to piggyback off that because you mentioned somebody's called in 25 times, they're probably unhappy. I see this example more often than you would expect in terms of people looking for signals that says this is an unhappy customer, and that's not like a churn model, right? Like I can't wait a week or however often that churn model refreshes to be able to say, this person's unhappy or not. So if you combine that historical data, right, in Tealium, and you have that available on the customer profile, but then they call in, you need that call in to then retrieve how many other times has this person called in the last 7 days, in the last 3 days, right? Like something that's really immediate to put into your call queue that says, this person's now at, 7, or they're at 7 calls in the last, 3 days, right? Mm-hmm. Like I gotta get them a good customer service rep, right? Like they're going to churn, they're having a bad experience. I was talking to somebody last night about some Comcast nightmare that they were dealing with, and I was like, my God, if they just had a routing software that could tell you that they were having a really bad experience because their time on call was more than 10 minutes, there's like really simple things that you could do. It's just a matter of orchestrating it correctly, right?
Sure.
And I think, when you talk about stuff like, Snowflake being that, well, let me get I don't need maybe all the records of calls over the last 3 years, but I certainly need to know what's happened in a shorter period of time. And if I'm going to, orchestrate some type of SMS or something like that, or I want to kind of push them into maybe more of a live chat scenario instead of a phone call where I know they're not going to get the right level of service that they need, I can use an SMS to prompt them and say, at the time they're calling, send them an SMS and say, hey, just to let you know, the wait time is 5 minutes. We'll give you a call back then, or something like that. Right? You can almost like get ahead of it and not wait for your call prompt to do that for you.
Yeah, and if you do it the right way, you turn an unhappy customer into a happy customer.
Yeah.
Awesome. So I don't know if we're going to have time for questions from the crowd. Let's see how we go on this last one here. But this is my final question to the two of you. Got to talk about AI just for a minute here. Just sort of, how are you seeing your clients leverage it? What do you think about it? And just looking to see if you have any particular stories and successes that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I think with Braze, for those of you that are unaware, we look at AI in three major groups. So the first being generative AI, which we all know, right? Generating text, generating images. That at this point I feel like is table stakes for any engagement platform. Everyone's got a copywriter, right? But then we think about our intelligent suite. And now this is where it really starts to get interesting. We've got a few different products within our intelligence suite, one of which is intelligent timing. So being able to pause in a journey, in a customer journey, and wait, and send the next step, send the next message, et cetera, when that unique user is most likely to engage with it. The same goes for channel. So going back to optimizing ad spend, also optimizing just general channel spend by only sending the message to your user on the channel that they're most likely to engage in. And again, this is unique to the user. So I think being able to have these really, really easy levers to pull where a marketer can just pick from a drop-down and say, if intelligent channel is email, send email is wildly powerful and unlocks so much. And we also do, we have a predictive suite as well. So the ability to, predict a future event, predict a churn likelihood, put that user into a segment and then be able to action off of that is really, really powerful. But the primary thing here is allowing AI and demystifying AI for the marketer and making it really, really easy to use in their day-to-day.
Awesome.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think on the generative AI stuff, what you guys are doing is amazing. I mean, it's also even better than like just a ChatGPT plugin because you're doing all the like branding level stuff and being able to actually feed it what it's already written to sort of take into account and almost get a little bit more of a synchronized voice there. So I think you guys are well ahead of the curve there. I also think from a CDP perspective, right, like the CDP offers some AI tools, but what it really offers is clean data, structured data, and governed data from many different places that go back into your data warehouse that your data scientists pick up and they build their models off of it, or they use the out of the box hundreds of models that are already out there. And then they think about things like refresh time and whatnot, and what compute costs they want to spend against that. I think the level of data that you get out of Braze in terms of message engagement, people entering control experiments or treatment groups or interactions, and having that, by the way, available like seconds after it happens, I think that's so powerful to be able to bring that back into my churn model production. Again, in that sort of real-time example use case, if my churn model refreshed today at, let's say refreshed at 5 p.m. for whatever, right? And somebody opened, and there's a person who's at very high churn likelihood, but they just opened an email. And I kick them out of my churn model now, right? Like I can do this like really fast suppression stuff just by virtue of how fast they're engaging in Braze, how fast it's coming through Tealium, and also the fact that I can then feed that back into the churn model and be able to, the next time it refreshes, I now have a better score on that person. So I think there's always a little bit of hesitancy in terms of using AI. I get it. Like if you've played around in ChatGPT at all, you're like, sometimes it's good, sometimes it's writing fantasy for me, right? And like, that's great too. Maybe that was my goal in the long run. But I also think that it helps us like think about things a little bit differently, because if you can't like be the monkey on the machine anymore, right? You can't just like do your work all day long, every single day, and then hope that you're gonna get a better outcome, right? Like at some point, you have to sort of step back and say, do I add 30 more bodies to this problem to solve it, or do I add 2 bodies and a really smart, would you say, put the robot back in the machine?
Yeah.
Like I think that's like just a fantastic way of thinking about it, and I just love that possibility of, people can go and build micro-segmentation models, and they can build this idea of like, hey, I want to get like my best customers, I'm gonna do an RFM model segmentation. Anybody heard of that term before? Have gone through an RFM exercise, and you end up with like 16 segments, and they're all little rectangles and triangles and squares and a giant square, and and you're like, okay, well these are my 16 segments. I'm going to do everything to these 16 segments, and how many bodies do you need to orchestrate that in any platform? And I think just that ability for AI to kind of help do some of that for you. And maybe you do 2 out of 16 because those are the ones that really matter, but for the other 14, you can create a personalized experience. Well, generative AI can do that for you. The ML models can do that for you, and I think that's like really powerful. So it does require a bit of a mind shift, changed, so to speak, because we're so used to like, I don't trust this thing. But at some point you got to be like, but would I have like paid attention to it anyway in my day to day? And I think once you hit that inflection point and you're like, actually, I really care about these people. These ones, I'm like, they can go to the machine.
Yeah, absolutely. It allows you to stop over-engineering the problem and to let technology work where it should and allow the human to actually realize their own potential in their career by letting them to stop doing so much busy work.
Yeah.
So much busy work.
That's a very good point.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much.